After we had moved Harmony's body into the hotel room, it was only a few minutes before I'd reinstalled the spark battery controller to get the Marauder rolling again. Longbow had managed to put her armor on correctly before joining me inside the car, seeming relieved to have it back around her. We left Sky and Carlotta to continue on our way to Manhattan, and I was surprised to see that Longbow seemed to be getting used to the jolts and shakes of the heavy vehicle gave as we clipped along the old road. The old highway took us around the northeast of Colt Mountain, before it was a straight shot to Manhattan. We had ridden for about an hour before we even saw a glimpse of civilization again as we passed Red Wing. The old mining town was one of the number of attempts to revitalize the search for gemstones, but had fallen on hard times without striking anything of value. Sometimes Sky and I would stop the night there, but the town's ponies were a skittish bunch, and frankly seemed genuinely unstable. "Thanks," Longbow said as she scooted up next to me on the bench seat, "for telling me how you got your cutie mark. I know it's a personal thing, and most ponies don't like to share it." "Well, maybe you could share yours with me. Hell, I'd like to at least see your flank for once." I blushed and face-hoofed as she stifled a laugh. "Wait, that came out wrong. What I meant to say is every time I'm around, you are in your armor, or you're in that dress." "It's not something I like to share with just any pony. It's a personal badge of honor for me. It was a big part of my life to get it," she said as she blushed slightly. "Could you at least give me a hint, or tell me your special talent?" I said as I nudged her armored chest with a smile, drawing one across her muzzle in response. "I can judge ponies," she stated bluntly. To be honest, I'm not even sure what that meant, but I let her continue. "With my magic, I can review the memories of a pony's crimes and tell if they are truly sorry for his or her actions, whether they are worth reforming or not." I must have had my confusion all over my face, as she went to rephrase it. "The magic lets me share their emotions of the event as I watch their memories of it. If I feel regret or remorse, or even horror, they knew what they did was wrong and have a chance to be reformed." That was impressive. I don't know how else to describe it, but I'd never heard of anything like that before. I wondered what she would read off me if she could watch the last 2 weeks. I stiffened up slightly. What if she has already read me? I looked over at her slowly as she cocked an eyebrow. "No, I haven't judged you yet." She crossed her armored forelooves and frowned. "Do I need to?" I gave a nervous grin and shrugged. "I don't actually know. I'd like to believe I had good reasons for my actions." Good going, Backlash. Now she's totally going to judge the living shit out of you. I was just going to say... Longbow started before she looked out the driver's side window. "What is that?" I swung my gaze over to see we were driving past a group of small houses, known to travelers as Minefield. Not a super creative name, though to give the local ponies credit, it is accurate. I noticed there was an oddly shaped white rock sitting inside the ruined playground in the center of the ruins. That's weird. I don't remember that being over there. No pony had ever really been through the ruins, because during the Great War, some pony thought it would be a fantastic idea if they laid anti-tank mines all over the place. The stupid things are magnetic, so you can't even bring a minesweeper in to clear them, and they are buried almost randomly. I slowed us to a stop, shutting off the Marauder as I looked closer at the roundish rock, slowly making out the true shape. That's not a rock in the minefield. It's a zebra, I said slowly as I swung open the door. "Hang out here while I check it out." "Screw that," Longbow said as she scooted closer to my door. "I'm going with you." No. Freeze," I said sternly as I held up my hoof. "There's a reason I parked this far away. They are magnetic mines. If you get too close, your armor will set them off." Longbow grumbled to herself as I shut the door, sitting in the front seat with her forehooves crossed. "I'll only be a minute, I promise." I turned and slowly walked towards the town, noting that most of the mines in the section had been set off, leaving small craters filled with the bones of a few ponies. Well, I couldn't be 100% sure there were no mines, but I hadn't exploded yet. As I approached the playground, I noticed the body had lacerations all over it, and very little blood. The buzzer must have been picking at it for a while, I said as I tried carefully to push myself over the playground fencing, only to have it fold forward under my weight, dropping me on top of it with a slam. I got to my hooves and dusted myself off, looking up to see the zebra was a stallion, and had one of the mines laying upside down on top of one of his forelegs. Well, that's weird. I crouched down and looked at the mine from a distance, noticing that the trigger hadn't been depressed and that the mine should be safe to move. I looked down and bit down on the handle of the mine, attempting to flip it over and to disarm it. I was surprised to see the zebra's leg held to it so tightly as I lifted it up and turned it over. I hit the disarm switch with my hoof and sighed through the bit as the small green indicator popped up on the mine to show it was safe. I tugged the mine to toss it beside me, only to have their stubborn leg refuse to let it go. I grunted and pinned the leg with my hoof, twisting my sore neck with all my might to fling the disc, finally breaking hold of the zebra. I watched with a cringe as the disc flew 20 or so feet, surprisingly landing in the dirt with a thud. I crouched low, half expecting it to attract another mine, but happy to see that it just sit there in the dust as it cleared. I shrugged myself and looked back down to see the striped body staring up at me with my eyes filled with both fear and confusion. "Don't hurt me," he said softly as he trembled on the ground. "Whoa, I'm not here to hurt you," I said slowly, taking a step back. "I saw you lying here. I came to see if you were all right." He sat up sharply and looked around quickly, hyperventilating heavily. "You need to help me," he said as he looked up at me. "They're going to kill me if they find me again." "Slow down. Take a deep breath. First of all, what is your name?" I said slowly, holding my hoof out for him to grab it. He just stared up at me wide-eyed, his vision darting between my gaze and my hoof. He took a long breath before he calmed slightly. "I do not remember." He steadily pushed himself to his hooves without my help. I sighed and face-hoofed. "Can you not remember anything? Or just not your name?" He seemed to ponder this for a moment. "Most of it's fuzzy, but I remember being pulled from a mine shaft. I was caught in a cave-in, but was saved by a group of ponies dug me out. For some reason they tried to kill me, and I ran. I kept running until I saw this place, but that's where I lost everything else." Fantastic. From what I can tell in his voice and expression, he was telling the truth. But now this opens up a whole new question. What do I do with him? Well, the only mine I know around here is Red Ring Mine. I watched him tense up at the name. "Is that where you're from?" He gave a small nod. "I can take you back there if you'd like." He shook his head. "They'll kill me if I try to go back there." Starting to quake again, his eyes darted around. "Please, take me somewhere else. Anywhere else." "Okay. It's okay." I lowered my voice and pointed my hoof towards the marauder. "I'm on my way back to Manhattan. You can ride along with us as long as you agree not to murder us." I tried to say it as light-heartedly as possible, but I still didn't want to get murdered by some random wastelander. I just wanted to help. "All right. I'll go with you," he said slowly, turning and shakily stepping over the fallen fence. I gave my best reassuring smile and walked up beside him, glancing over his... what did they call them again? Whatever the zebra's equivalent of a cutie mark was. It was remarkably similar to a spell matrix chip. Maybe he was some sort of computer whiz. My attention was drawn over to a rock as it wiggled slightly, slowly dragging itself closer. My eyes went wide as I reflexively dropped to my hooves out from under me, trying to scream to warn the stallion of the mine next to him. The explosion was deafening as the anti-tank weapon went off. I could feel small rocks and hot bits of metal punch into my hide as the blast knocked me back a good 3 feet. I gasped and coughed as I struggled for breath, finally sucking in some air. I looked up to see Longbow standing over me in the bloody dress with a frown. I worried for a moment she had been hurt by the mine, but she was trying to speak to me. I couldn't hear her, what she was saying, and she pulled me back to my hooves, helping me limp along as the smoke and dust cleared, walking up to a shredded flesh of the zebra stallion. I shook my head to try and clear my vision, but it didn't help me understand what I saw any better. I was staring down at the open remains. The zebra's chest cavity was a mess of all sorts of tubes and boxes. Half of his right leg was severed, and several long servos and actuators, along with a pantheon of wiring. This thing was a machine. I sat down and leaned forward. The largest box had some sort of port. In fact, I think it was some sort of pip buck to connect it to. I screamed it, but I told Longbow to grab my toolkit from the glove compartment. After a few moments of tinkering, I had jerry-rigged the connector cable out of the Robo-Zebra's own parts. Would it be a Robo-Zebra? Cyber-Zebra? I don't fucking know. I mean, I had no idea this complex stuff could even exist. I attached the cable both to him and to my pip-buck, looking down at the screen as it flashed lines of code before coming up with a notification. Ministry Chief authorization accepted. A few more lines of code scrolled before a prompt for a single text file was on the computer. I hesitantly opened it, slightly disappointed when I saw it was short. PSP, Test, Unit 87, Project Isaac. Intrinsic Surveillance, Advanced Arcanotech Concept. Field Test Unit, designed with immersion protocols. Testing the use of brain pattern transfer of a zebra subject's mind into a unit's personality matrix with the goal to create and conceive intelligent frame with remote surveillance capabilities. So, yeah, I'm kind of at a loss on this one. I'd seen lots of pre-war stuff, but nothing this ridiculously weird. I mean, fuck! What in Celestia's name am I supposed to do with a freaking cyber robo-zebra thing? I closed the text file only to have another notification pop up. Spell Matrix reboot in progress. Please do not disconnect the cable. Wait. This thing was still in good enough condition to run? It just took out an anti-tank mine to the chest. I looked up over to Longbow, who had a health potion held in her mouth and a worried look on her face. I looked myself over for a moment to see if any of my injuries were bad enough to warrant a potion, but was starting to feel the purple liquid pour into my ear. As I shook my head vigorously, I was greeted by the sound of the midday breeze. Wow. Why didn't I think about that last time? I said as I hit the side of my head softly, trying to get the remaining potion out. I felt a Longbow force my head the other direction before pouring more of the potion into my ear. I was happy to be able to hear her put the bottle down. I'd be surprised, she said as she took a step back. But with the last few days you've had, it's not hard to think this sort of thing happens all the time. Up until 2 weeks ago, my life was never this interesting, I swear. I looked back to my pip-buck with a sigh. Now, what do? I mean, I've never seen this tech this complex, and I'm sure that I could find someone who would be interested in it. Well, if I could Are you going to fix him? Longbow looked quite blunt before I'd even finished thinking it. Fix it? I mean, it can't really be a him, can it? My pip-buck beeped as a new notification popped up. Matrix reboot complete. Critical structural frame failure detected. Primary logic spell Cortex in safe mode until repairs can be made. Warning, system power at 36%. In the event of critical power loss, primary energy systems will use all reserve power to follow standard cascade overload protocols, resulting in complete vaporization of the project. I guess I could try, but to be honest, I've never seen anything like this before. I unhooked the cable from my pip-buck and stood up with a sigh. Hoist him onto me, so I can get him to the Marauder. I don't want to find out I can fix him and have another one of those mines blow him to bits and undo my work. What if it activates another one while we're pulling out? She said with hesitation in her words. Then we get to see if he and I can take another blast. I'm sure you'll be fine. I took one, and I seemed fine. I replied lightheartedly. 1, you aren't fine. You're insane to even be thinking this. 2, you're going to call it a him? She joked back as I leaned down next to the robotic zebra. She used her hooves to roll him over, levering him up onto my back with a piece of broken fence near the playground. As the remains flopped onto my back, I happened to remember that this metal is heavy, and a zebra made of metal, covered by flesh, was doubly so. My limbs protested as I strained myself to stand up. Yup. I managed to say under the tremendous strain, taking stiff, short steps towards the car. All right, 3 feet down, only about 47 more to go. I heard Longbow shuffle in the dirt behind me for a moment, suddenly trotting past me with the severed leg in her mouth. I noticed that the hoof was bending along its joints, smoothly in her muzzle, arcing back towards me as she walked. Longbow, I groaned out. The hoof. It's following. A magnet. She stopped and looked down at the robotic appendage, turning her head slowly and watching as it stayed pointed at one specific rock in the dirt. We can use that to guide us through. I watched as she nodded and slowly walked with me. Over the next grueling 20 minutes, I struggled to put the heavy machine along the path the hoof guided us through. I had to use my forehoofs to drag myself forward along the ground the last few feet of the car, but we made it. I panted heavily and moaned as Longbow pushed him off my back and onto the dirt. You all right there, Backlash? She said softly as she put a hoof on my shoulder. I raised my hoof painfully and waved it lightly at her. I'll be fine. I just need a small nap. As I panted on the cool dirt, I shut my eyes for a moment to try and think of how I was going to pull this off, unsurprised when I felt all my pain drift away slowly. The warm breeze felt good as it blew through my mane, the sunlight pouring down from above, giving me the strength to get up once again. I smiled as I sat up, opening my eyes to find myself laying in the grass under a familiar-looking tree. I could hear the jubilant music playing in the distance that instantly brought happiness to my mind. For once, I was glad to be back here, finally able to get a break from the horrors of the wasteland and my nightmares. I pulled myself to my hooves, enjoying the feel of the grass underneath them. Well, time to say hello to Pinky, I guess. I said softly, feeling my ear twitch suddenly. That happened far too often to not be one of those weird pinky sense things. I'll have to pay more attention next time it happens. And you just did. The overly hyper voice shouted from above. I watched in surprise as the bright pink filly dropped out of the tree branches and landed on her hooves in front of me. You certainly like spending time in that tree, don't you? I asked as she bounced on her hooves. Not to mention it's the only tree around here. Why is that? Oh, it's because she reminds me of a really, really, really good friend that I haven't seen in a long time, she said as she bolted around me, galloping circles around the tree as she giggled. The sky darkened for a moment, making me turn to look up at the sun. One of the balloon-shaped clouds was passing across it slowly. So, the tree is a she? I slowly asked, not sure if she was serious. Upon further insight and thought, she is Pinkie Pie, so something that absurd has to be true. Mm-hmm, she said as she skidded to a stop in front of me. Anyway, I have to send you back now. You weren't supposed to come back yet, and your friend is helping me plan the best party. My friend? I rolled the back of my head in confusion. Uh-huh. She's super big and tough looking for a unicorn. Also, she keeps telling me how you helped her and her friends. She exclaimed loudly. Harmony. I muttered under my breath. I took off towards the music as fast as I could, my hooves thumping along the soft ground as I pushed them to carry me faster than ever before. A pink blur sped in front of me before I was stopped abruptly. Pinkie had a single hoof on my chest, and she shook her head. I can't let you do that, Backlash, she said with a soft, sad tone in her hair as it deflated, laying flat as she looked up to me. It's against the rules, and I'll get in trouble. I have to see her, I said, as I tried to take a step sideways, finding that I couldn't move at all. I need to tell her I'm sorry, that I hate myself because I couldn't save her. My vision was blurring as tears welled up in my eyes. She knows, Backlash. Pinkie smiled back at me softly, her blue eyes conveying the most sincere gaze she'd ever given. I'll tell you what. If you Pinkie promise not to tell any pony back in the real world ever, I'll let you see her. My thoughts jumped back to the old man, how he made me promise never to tell any pony about how I made Luna come out. I remembered how I had failed to keep that promise, and ended up getting every pony I cared about almost killed as a result. I didn't want to make a mistake again. I didn't want to risk losing any pony else due to my own selfish stupidity. No. You're right, I said, as the tears rolled down my cheeks. I can't keep that promise. I'm sorry, Pinky. I felt the filly throw her hooves around my neck tightly, hugging me warmly. Pinky whispered into my ear softly, "It's okay. She doesn't blame any pony for the things that happened in her life. She was just happy she met you before it was over." That made a small smile draw across my muzzle slowly as it sunk in. I felt as she dropped off me and took a few steps back. "I'll see you again soon, Backlash." The filly yelled as she bounced high into the air, dropping her hooves onto my face, knocking me back into the darkness once more. I groaned out loudly as the pain returned all over my body, making me instantly regret not having Longbow dose me with a healing potion or Med-X earlier. How long was I out for? I mumbled as I slowly opened my eyes, staring into the deep blue eyes of the robotic zebra standing over me, a red glow softly pressing in the recesses of his pupils. "Oh, Backlash, you're up. You've been out for almost an hour." Longbow called out before trotting around to the front of the car. "Say hello to Isaac. It looks like when you connected your pip-buck, it fixed his memories." He smiled softly down over me as I looked back to him. Why is he running again?" I said as I tried to remain still, hoping that he wasn't going to do some existential rampage and kill all ponies. "So after you fell asleep, I gathered all the parts together and was looking over him in more detail. You know, standard Steel Ranger stuff." Longbow's horn gave a dim glow as she could barely levitate a fancy buck snack cake across the hood, starting to munch on it as she talked. "I noticed that one of the boxes had a slot for an auto-repair talisman, but you got me thinking that I'll just let him use the one from my suit. And, you know, Isaac here put himself back together. Well, mostly. Anyway, I filled him in the last 120 years, more or less." Isaac nodded happily as she finished her snack cake. "I see." I replied skeptically as I looked over the near-flawless striped hide. "I thought the suit's repair talisman could only repair metal. How did you get your flesh back?" Isaac mouthed the words to me with a nervous look on his face before finally looking over at Longbow. "Like I said, he's mostly back to normal. His speech system doesn't seem to be working yet," she said with a small sigh. "Oh, and yeah, I gave him all the cans of beans you had. He just scarfed them down, can and all. It was very fascinating to watch. Why were you even carrying so many anyway?" Finally, some good news. Celestia knows I hated playing bean roulette, and they were always the last thing I reached for when going to make food. Anyway, he must have had some sort of talisman that heals tissue like the repair one, Men's Metal. I would love to get him back to the base and look him over. My brain screamed as it tried to process everything, the gears feeling like it was going to melt from working so hard. I put my hooves over my head and groaned. Celestia, why must everything make me hurt? I turned to tell Longbow we weren't going to do that, but stopped when I noticed a few red bars moving on the edge of my EFS from the other side of the car. I frantically waved for Longbow to come closer. "Bad guy's coming. Get over here," I whispered as she walked over. "What?" she asked before turning towards me. I nodded slowly as I turned my vision towards the bars, finding that it was just a sea of red lines. I peeked my head up and looked through the glass, seeing a mass of feral ghouls slowly shambling towards us. "Ghouls," I whispered. "Do they look like they want to talk?" Longbow whispered back with a shrug. "No," I said with far more fear in my words than I wanted to hear myself say. "How many?" she said as she sank against the side of the car. "Lots," I said as I dragged my hooves down my face. I felt a soft tap on my shoulders, my eyes turning to meet Isaac's as he smiled and drew something in the dirt. "Wait 1 minute." I looked up in confusion just as he turned and bolted past the front Marauder, taking off into the open desert at an unprecedented speed. The mass of ghouls let out a series of horrendous screeches as the whole herd gave chase after him, the gears in my head connecting one last thought before giving out, sending a sharp staff of pain along my neck. "Longbow, is all your stuff in the car?" I whispered as I turned to her, getting a slow nod. "Get in the back seat quietly. I have an idea." I gingerly opened the driver's seat door and climbed in, waiting for the soft click of the back door to close. I sighed softly and tried to relax, letting my mind clear itself slightly. "I have a bad feeling about this," Longbow said softly. "All right, let's go," I shouted, as I sharply hoofed the engine start button, grinning as the large magical engine thundered to life, before I shifted it into drive and slammed the accelerator down. The tires spun with a light scratch and kicked up rocks before we were propelled forward, sharply turning away from the minefield before correcting back towards the charging ghouls. As much fun as it was, I didn't need to blow up twice in one day. "What's the plan again?" Longbow yelled from the back seat, trying to contend with the noise of the engine as it thumbed quickly. "When we pass Isaac, you open the door and pull him in." I called back, and swerved to avoid a ghoul who had turned back to attack us. We had caught up to the main group, overshooting them as the marauder pulled up alongside, with relative ease, while I looked out the window and smiled to the speedy zebra, getting a soft smile in return. I slowed down and steered towards him, trying to keep the jostling vehicle steady as we raced across the uneven terrain. "Just a bit closer, Backlash," Longbow yelled as she opened the door. I maneuvered the vehicle with a light touch, drifting closer and closer as the screams and howls of the feral ghouls filled the air. I heard a loud thump on the roof, making me swerve slightly. "Or he could get in that way," she yelled as she shut the door with a thump. I turned around to ask her what happened, only to watch as he swung himself through the passenger's side window to sit on the seat next to me. He beamed a smile as I looked over him in disbelief. "We all good?" I called out as I turned the car back in the direction of the highway. I was relieved to see both Longbow and our new zebra companion nod. "Good. No more distractions. If we kept driving until nightfall, we could make it back to the garage by midday tomorrow." "Thank you." Isaac's voice cracked out before emitting a loud, grinding noise. "Thank you, is what I meant to say." The crowd of ghouls had seemed to be given up pursuit, and disappeared over the horizon. "No problem," I said as I cocked an eyebrow. "I didn't really do anything, though." "You removed the magnet from me. If you hadn't, I would have just lived there forever," he stated rather matter-of-factly. "Just hold up 1 second, I said as I face-hoofed. "How can you even exist? I didn't even know the level of robotics were even scientifically possible." I prodded his chest with my hoof sharply. "You aren't scientifically possible. The most complex one I've ever seen is one of those Sentry security bot things. And that's Tinker Toys compared to you." I put both hooves back on the wheel in frustration. Although I still don't know everything about myself, I believe I was built to be a spy during the war, and tasked to blend in with the workforce at the time, make friends and live a simple life as they monitored me, all while I didn't even know what I was. He waved his hoof over himself. "I was buried accidentally when my tunnel collapsed, and I guess I went into hibernation, only to be reactivated a few years ago when I was dug out during exploration of the mine. Unfortunately, they saw me for what I was and ran me out of town. I figured out most of the robotic stuff when I had time to look myself over." "So how did you end up in the minefield?" Longbow asked as she threw her hooves over the seat between us. "I used to live there, in a modest-sized house, a nice green lawn. Even had one of those." He smiled as he ran his hoof along the dashboard slowly, watching as his smile faded, a sad look crawling over his face. "But that was all a lie. I'm not real, just some machine." I scrunched up my muzzle in thought before looking over at him. "That's not what the file on my pip-buck said. They said they transferred a zebra's brain into this body, so that means you must have had an actual body at one point." I didn't know if that was true, but the emotions he wore were far too convincing to be just a machine. I could hear it in his synthetic voice, the notes of true sadness. Machines can't feel pain or anguish. It matters not. I have no purpose in this new world. He said softly. What about your glyph mark? Longbow suggested. It has no meaning to me. I used to move rocks all day, and know next to nothing about computers. If I was truly a zebra at one time, this was not my glyph mark. I smacked my hoof on the steering wheel as an idea popped into my head. You do have a purpose. You have to have a good pony, to pony interaction skills, to be some sort of spy. So why not get a job as some pony who deals with a lot of other ponies? Think of what you could do as some pony like a security officer, or maybe a regulator. Not to mention you're faster, stronger, and more attuned to your surroundings than a regular pony. Longbow tapped my shoulder softly, beaming a bright look at me. That's not half bad. Ever since they expanded trade to Friendship City, is always looking for better security guards to weed out the smugglers and riffraff. You really think that'd be a good idea? Would they hire a zebra? Isaac asked as he stiffened up. I don't think he expected us to be so helpful. What if they find out about me? Friendship City is open to every race, and without landmines and cave-ins, I think you'll be fine, I said hesitantly. Although it might not be a bad idea to just explain yourself away as a cyber zebra? I've only seen one cyber pony in all my years of trading, and that was in Paradise. So I don't think many folks will question you if you tell them that. You've been to Caledonia? Longbow asked with genuine concern and little more than curiosity. Don't ask, I said flatly. I didn't want to be reminded of those times, the good or the bad. I shuddered lightly and shook the thought from my head. After a few long hours of driving, the sun had finally set as we bounced along the old highway. I kept an eye out for a place to pull in and spend the night at, joyously remembering the old fuel station nearby that Sky and I sometimes camped out at. I flicked the headlights on as the sun dripped out, shrouding the hills in cloaks of black as we turned off the highway and made our way along the winding, one-lane gravel road. The Marauder's bright beams highlighted the dilapidated and rusting structure, the flanking paint still mostly spelling out Poseidon Gas and Go, a friend of Solaris Incorporated, in light blue lettering. I rolled the thundering vehicle towards the small garage attached to the main building, looking around and checking my EFS for any hostile bars, happy to find it was empty. As the Marauder pulled into the small carport, I shut it off, letting the relaxing silence fill the air. I didn't even know this place was here. What is this place? Longbow muttered under her breath, her words filled with amazement. She pointed a hoof over the two small rusted boxes sitting out front. What was it used for? It's a gas station, I stated with pride. What? Longbow said flatly as she looked back at me. It was an invention called gasoline, and was utilized inside internal combustion engines as a highly inefficient fuel force. I shrugged as I leaned back in my seat. I'm not surprised you never heard of it, being I was only around for a few years. With the invention of spark batteries, Poseidon was closed by Solaris due to unprofitability, and all the stations were just left to rot away. Wow, she said as she looked around in wonder. How do you know all this? I like to visit pre-war museums. I went through the Museum of Arcano Technology last time I was in Philadelphia. They have some pretty neat stuff stored in there, I said with a note of pride. He's correct, you know, Isaac said slowly. They stopped using these a little after I was born. Wait, what? You know when you were born? He froze in thought for a moment. No, but I know when these were antiqued technology when I was young. He smiled and looked up at me, with a sparkle in his eye. Not literally, though, that would just be freaky. I was young. I was a real zebra. I just know it. He jumped giddily on his hooves for a few moments, crashing onto me and hugging me tightly. All right, settle down there, Isaac. I laughed lightly and awkwardly hugged him back. I told you that you had to be once, had to have a real body. Score a win on my part for an educated guess. Longbow leaned back in her seat with a long yawn, pulling one from my own muzzle as I followed hers. I think we should get some rest, she said as she curled herself up on the plush seat. I nodded and got to my hooves as Isaac sat back. Do I even need to sleep? He asked, as I failed to hop over the seat, landing on my face on the floor with a thud and groan. Fuck, that hurt. Any more trauma and my neck will be the next thing on the growing petition of body parts wanting to retire. My advice is that you at least try to get some. You can take the front seat. I grumbled out onto the floor mats as I flopped completely onto my side. I lay for a moment, waiting in response, but got nothing. Shrugging, I pressed my back against the front seat and closed my eyes, trying to think of the warm dream with Pinky, imagining the sun as it shone down, radiating brightly onto me. I smiled as I drifted away, looking forward to my second good sleep in a long while. I woke to the sound of the howling wind, slowly opening my eyes as I lifted my head to look around. My vision cleared enough for me to see that it was still dark outside the sky car. I wondered where my friends were as I pushed myself off the cold floor, shivering and walking slowly over to the open door. I leaned on the frame as I peered out slowly, gasping as I watched Longbow being led in the air by Pallet's father and another one of Ponyville's dead Pegasi. She struggled uselessly as they hovered her over the side of the building. Murderer. I froze as their voices echoed deep in my mind. They were right. I only got the ponies killed trying to save them. She was doomed either way. You killed us all. I felt their words tear into me, gasping as pain shot through me, gaping wounds opening all over my body to pour black blood out into the night. I don't want to be a murderer. I just want to help every pony. It's not my fault. It's all your fault. The words tore the wounds bigger as I screamed, the inky black liquid gushing out, spreading into a large puddle underneath me. Please, no more! I looked up to see Longbow's crying face, and I could hear her sobbing quietly as they held her over the darkness. Help me. You can't escape what you are. I waited for the inevitable pain to rip me apart, for them to yank my very soul out and devour it. But there was nothing. As I waited, I felt something else well up inside of me. A pulsing warmth was spreading throughout me. It was something I hadn't felt in a long time. I watched as the gushing wounds grew brighter, pouring light out as they shrunk and the inky fluid began to drip into nothingness. Put her down! I yelled as I charged out of the sky car, slamming my hooves against the roof as I galloped towards Longbow. The Pegasi laughed and let go, her blue eyes filling with fear as she dropped. I jumped and dove over the edge of the building, reaching out my hoof to hers as we both fell into the darkness. I yelled and strained to reach out, finally hoofing and hooking around her hoof, thinking to myself that at least she wouldn't go alone.